Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I am talking to the amazing Chrissi McCarthy. We're talking about taking an interruption in your PhD, and we talk about why you might feel that this is a failure. We talk about why this absolutely isn't a failure, and indeed what it might bring and how it might enrich your PhD journey. So I do hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Chrissi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. This is going to be a good one, I think. So you have been on a journey. You've been on many journeys.
So many. So many different modes of transport.
We're going to talk about this kind of the PhD journey, obviously in particular, but the process of kind of taking interruption from that, and that's a big one for a lot of people, and so that is what we're diving into today. And thank you for stepping up, and you're gonna share it all with us. So thank you for that. But before we get going, you were gonna. It's the same thing as I ask everybody in terms of just giving us a sense of your journey into the PhD, through it, and out the other side, because you do amazing work now. So just this sense of how that was for you.
Yeah, so I never really had any thoughts about academia at all. I just wanted to be a builder. And so I did that 10 years. And like concrete and cranes are just where my little heart lies. And it's the most fun. And so I did that for 10 years. And I love building things. I still do. I keep extending the house, there's gyms in the garden. But what I didn't always love was the experience that I had within the construction industry, and whether that was the more general things like presenteeism, long hours culture, the pressure, this forever ongoing pressure of the industry, but then coupled with the experience that I had being a woman, which was like just all day, every day, everything, just always having to consistently prove yourself again and again, which after kind of 5 years, you start seeing patterns. By 10, and you look up and there's no one in the positions above you, you realize that maybe this is a problem that's not just to do with your perceived own incompetence, because obviously that's where I went to first. I'm not good enough. I'll just work harder until I bleed myself to bone. But one of the things I found really very interesting was a lot of the things that were being put in place around equality that were designed to help me actually made the situation worse. Equality and diversity training that focused on the law made my colleagues scared to talk to me, scared to get things wrong, scared to employ women. Women in construction days often didn't give me any solutions, but would, garner comments from site around, you get a day off to chat with the other women. So it was constant. So I became really interested in, okay, how do we make equality work? And so I figured that was going to be easy. Bless. I thought I'd just start business, get this solved, go back to building stuff in the afternoon. 16 years later. I went to do a master's. I started a master's. I didn't finish it because basically a PhD was cheaper and I was self-funded. So I did the postgrad certificate and diploma. I can't remember which round it was, but I did both of those. I thought I was just going to find out the solutions and then implement them in construction. But what I found was we don't know the answers to how to make equality work. And so I had an idea of what might be stopping it. And so that's when I ended up doing a PhD. I was heavily encouraged by Ghassan Aoud at University of Salford, and then later Andrew Dainty at Loughborough. Without those two people showing faith in me, I would have never done that. I mean, I come from a family where me and my sisters were the first in my after my mum and dad to actually finish school, let alone my dad was busy doing other slightly more legal things, let alone go to college. Like college was a big deal, let alone university, master, PhD. We didn't even know what that was. But I do want to just give credit to my dad here, because he's worked out a way of telling people that might help other people from similar counsellors backgrounds, which is, my dad says that Chris isn't the sort of doctor that will save your life. She's the sort of doctor that will talk you to death. So
That's such a dad thing.
I love him. So that's how he understands it. But so I did the PhD. I thought I was doing the PhD to find out the answer to a question. But what my 9-year PhD journey taught me was that actually it was teaching me how to ask and answer questions. And that was a kind of a revelation within itself. And, I always say my PhD is one of the best and worst things I've ever done, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat.
Oh, amazing. Right. That is so golden as well in terms of learning how to ask the questions. And what a gift that is to people, because I know there'll be lots of people listening to this now going, I can't answer this. I don't know this. And you don't necessarily need to know it, do you? People don't need to know it. They just need to be knowing what questions they're going to ask.
Exactly. I thought I needed the answers, whereas my PhD taught me absolutely that I just don't know anything. Yeah. And it's okay. No, nobody else does either. But none of us do. And that really understanding that, or at least really understanding it as much as I do now, I'm sure I understand it more with every passing year. It felt like such a release. It felt so much easier, so much pressure lifted off, because I always felt, and still do, inadequate. And then to understand that this is much more about confidence and the display of confidence sometimes than it is about knowledge or skill, made it a little bit easier. And I've always found, I find increasingly, the more I realise how little I know and the more open I am to that with others, actually the better my working relationships are, the better the trainer I am, the better things are. And it's really weird, because you'd think it would be the other way. You'd think people would like the people that know everything, whereas actually I think that's more annoying sometimes. Reassuring in the right environments, but as a blanket rule, not always.
No, it's so permission giving, isn't it, to kind of go, I'm not sure about this. Well, let's have a conversation. And I think that, those kind of conference papers are exciting, aren't they? Where somebody goes, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And then people can kind of build on that. And I think absolutely what you're saying there in terms of PhD being a mindset game. It is totally a mindset game. Absolutely. And this sense of what you said about displaying of confidence, I love that. I love it. And it made me feel you were saying about this, realise you know nothing. There's that brilliant cartoon thing. I'll see if I can find it for show notes. But basically you start off thinking you're going to know everything. Like you go through school and you get all this information, but then the actual PhD is just going, I don't know anything. That's what you get. I know. Nothing.
Surprise.
I know nothing. Amazing. Right. Well, now we've sorted that out. I love that. And thank you for shouting out your people, because I think it's so important. And I think because I know a lot of people listening to this also are also teachers, and just remembering the difference that you make, and in terms of encouraging other people to go on this journey, you send amazing ripples into the world. So thank you to people, to us. Asana, and Andrew.
Sam said, and Andrew Dainty. But then later my PhD supervisor was Sarah Barnard and Derek Thompson, and they were both amazing in very, very different ways. But such clever, but generous people, the generosity of time that they gave me, and patience, such an incredible amount of patience. And they're just brilliant. And I love them, even if I think they're probably very fed up with me by the end of it. They were just amazing. I was very, very fortunate to have 3 such amazing supervisors.
Hooray for them. So now we're in talking about your PhD. Let's talk about that then. So what we were going to focus on today is this taking interruption. So tell us that bit of the story. How was that?
Yeah, so my PhD took 9 years all in, and I did it part-time. And so I was running a business and doing the PhD sort of at weekends and in evenings, occasionally a day here and there, but mostly weekends and evenings. And I'm not a good academic writer, not by any means. I tend to, I come from a big Irish family of storytellers, so I write in this storytelling way naturally, and that's not useful for a PhD. It's very frustrating. And also my brain is neurodivergent in some way, and I don't know which, because we just didn't diagnose things when I was at school. And now I've just gotten used to the funky little thing that it is and love it and wouldn't change it. But it does make writing academically difficult. And I didn't always recognize that was happening.
Right.
So I'm doing the PhD, and I was really, I say lucky, but maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was picking up on what I'd noticed when I'd worked on site. The results, I did mixed methods, and my quant results came back just demonstrating what I thought I was going to find. And yeah, it was easy. It wasn't like I didn't have enough data. It was there, and my qual was great as well. So the problem wasn't in the data.
No.
The problem was very, very much with me. And I think that's really important to say. And I know that. And quite frankly, I don't have shame in that. And the reason I don't have shame in that is because that is the point of a PhD. It is about learning. And I think people forget that sometimes. I think they think they're supposed to know the answers going in. I thought I was supposed to know the answers going in. I thought every draft that I wrote was supposed to be a finished draft. I know it's ridiculous now to think back upon it, but I believed it because that was kind of the way that it had happened before.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that the gift was in the edit. And now that I do, it's enlightening. Like, write terrible first drafts, people. It's freeing. It's wonderful. Just get that out your head. So anyway, my business had grown to, like, it was a startup. I don't have a trust fund. I mortgaged my house to grow this thing. I spent a lot of money on my education, and then I had a bad client, and we went from like 120 in the bank to minus 30 in the space of 8 months. Yeah, a client kept asking us to hold out for the delivery of something, and I didn't realize that they had different intentions. Let's put it that way. So anyway, so I ended up having to make redundancies of around 5 people. At the same time as this was happening, I lost a couple of kids. I had a couple of miscarriages very early, but we really wanted them. So as much as the heartbreak wasn't as hard as it's been for some people, it hit me hard.
That's a huge thing.
It was a big one. And on top of this, I come from a family that would often use alcohol to deal with problems. And so I adopted that tried and tested method. Spoiler alert, I don't advise it. Not good. And so I was starting to feel very much like a failure. And because I don't think it takes a lot to work out with all of this happening, I wasn't progressing in my PhD. Right. And of course, I wasn't sharing that with my supervisors. I didn't want to worry them. I didn't want to look like a failure. And so it just got to a point where my supervisor basically said to me, we don't know if you should be doing this. And that's when I kind of was like, just wrote this email to them outlining all of this and saying, I do not want to give up on this. This is still as important to me as it ever was. However, I do agree I'm pushing too hard, too far, because after the business went down and we made everyone redundant, it's about 3 months. I could barely get out of bed. And I genuinely remember sitting there thinking, how do people get up and shower? How do they just do that? It felt like the hardest thing. And that, of course, makes you feel so useless, so worthless. And then you've got someone telling you, just do a bit of exercise. And when you can't get out of bed, the idea of exercise feels insurmountable. And so that makes you feel like more of, and it just becomes this spiral. Yeah. Now, fortunately for me, I have an incredibly supportive partner who, despite never having poor mental health, which my brain doesn't even understand, I've had depression and anxiety since I was 13, which often makes me think I can deal with it. When no.
Yes.
He was incredibly supportive of me, and that helped. And it's obviously a lot harder when you've got different situations. So anyway, so we got to a point where I said, I can't remember if my supervisor suggested it or I did, but it was just, I don't want to give up on this, but I think I do need to break from this because there's too much. I feel like a failure, and it's almost like I just need to reset a little bit. And so I reset. And then just as I was coming back, I fell pregnant. And this one, I was fortunate enough to have stick around. And so then I took another, I think I came back for like 5 minutes, and then I took another break for maternity. And that really helped take the load off. Though if I'm honest, the thing that that got my PhD done for me was COVID, because my business work dried up, and having that time and headspace without the business got me through. So I would say to anyone that's doing their PhDs part-time, if you get into a similar situation like mine, and I know it's so hard when you've got bills coming in, but if you can just take some unadulterated time, because I realized after taking that time that it was almost as if I would get to a point, like the cusp of a breakthrough of understanding where I was going wrong, but then go back into my work thinking. And the work thinking was pretty much polar opposite of what I needed to do for a PhD. So I was always getting there and back. Yeah, so my poor supervisors often, poor, like they're brilliant people. I'm sure they survived me. But it must have felt like Groundhog Day for them. And I can see that now, but I didn't see that then. I was fixing the wrong problems because I wasn't in a headspace to be able to see what the problems were. So I interpreted them through my own insecurities, I suppose, rather than what they were actually saying to me. So yes. So sorry, I muddled all of that up. There are things.
No. There's, and I think that's the point, isn't it? It is a muddle. Life is messy and a muddle, and things come at you. And for you, I am so sorry to hear that all of that came at you all at once. But that is life too, isn't it? And I think that we set off on a PhD journey and we don't expect life to happen to us crazily. We go, you know what? I'm going to spend 3, 4, 5, 7, 9 years of my life, and it's all going to be totally fine. I'm never going to be ill. I'm never going to have anyone do anything that's not, and of course that isn't how life is. And for you, of course, this is extreme and really, really, really difficult stuff. But I think this sense of being aware that life is going to happen while the journey is going on is really important.
And learning how to give yourself space with that, not feeling like you have to take it all on and do it on. And do appreciate my hypocrisy in saying that, because it's not like I've learned. I know. See, so here's me too. I'm totally putting my hand up. So there's a total hypocrite sitting here. It's like, don't take it on yourself. Don't do that. Of course. The thing is, here we are. We're all together. We are all high achievers. We think we can do it all. And the reason is because we have these moments where we can, we know, we see these flashes of brilliance because we're smart people. But we expect that of ourselves all the time, every single day. And that's ridiculous. But I think it is, because you feel like a failure then when you don't do it. And I've gotten better at understanding, do you know what? Sometimes, oh God, why is it so hard to say sometimes I'm clever? Why does that hurt to say? Oh dear. Mostly I'm mediocre. And then occasionally I'm just terrible. Occasionally, maybe a bit more than occasionally. And I think that there's something in understanding that. There's something in feeling at ease with that. We cannot operate at this level all of the time. It is not emotionally, not, I was going to say not cleverly, not with intellect. Clearly not me. And I think we just have to be more forgiving of ourselves. And I always think that the thing that got me through my PhD was resilience. Do you mind if I tell a quick story? Because
please do.
I met up with one of my PhD supervisors, Andrew Dainty, a little while afterwards, and I said to him, he'd done something amazing. So I got this uncle who I love, and he says whenever he sees an ugly baby, which I don't believe there's such a thing, but he'll always say, nice pram. So that's his thing, like nice prams. So I know, bless him. So I said to my supervisor, you nice prammed me once. And he was like, what do you mean? So I explained that. And I said, well, it was one day and I'd handed in a load of stuff again. And it wasn't improved. And he said, at the end of the meeting, you turn around to me and said, Chris, I just want to say you are one of the most resilient people I have ever met. And that was nice pramming, because you were basically saying, this stuff is awful, but yet you are still here. And I think resilience is a very underrated quality in a PhD. But at the same time, I think you have to understand when to stop being resilient and to breathe and to realize the more you push, the less you see. It's almost like you get too close to the wall and you need to kind of just back off a bit. And I found for me, and if it doesn't for anyone else, sorry to imply that that's you, but for me, I found that made things clearer, that time away. So I think it's important to have that, because I know that there are supervisors who will say things like, unless you are working on your PhD 24/7, you're doing it wrong. And actually, I think that level of closeness to something can kind of stifle what you're seeing in it. So
no, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. So I think yes to resilience, yes to being really smart, and yes to this sense of actually a break is going to do me good. Because I think just want to come back to, you've said it a few times in terms of feeling like a failure, and I think this sense of when we're not able to juggle all the balls because there's just so many and they're coming at us so fast. It's impossible. We set up impossible standards, and then we feel like a failure because we're unable to meet that. So actually, really, I'm so pleased that we're kind of having this discussion in terms of saying to people, you are not a failure for taking a break. This is not a failure. This is a recognition. Actually, you just need some space just now.
Absolutely. And also, I think it's so important to say, and you're not a failure from walking away from a PhD.
Oh, exactly.
I've known people to walk away from PhDs and carry that with them. And no, you made a right choice for you. This is an incredibly hard thing to do. Unless you're working in the sciences, let's face it, it's a Ponzi scheme in some places. This is not necessarily always going to help with your career trajectory. I know it didn't for many years in my role, and it weirdly has now, but I wasn't expecting it. It wasn't what I was doing this for. I was doing it because I wanted to find something out. So if you start to think this is taking more than this is giving, and actually this is not weighing up, that's not failure. That's just good risk analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you for that. But I want to come back to this taking the time out, because I think it usually feels for people like, well, this will be it then. I'll take the time out and then I am walking away. That's how it feels. But actually, for your experience and for many people's experience, this taking time away, which you said interestingly about allowed you to see things more clearly and then come back. It's not that you were kind of, it was giving you an opportunity to keep going.
Yes. But I always knew I was coming back to it. There was never a doubt in my mind that I wouldn't come back to this. As terrifying as that might be, I've been to my supervisors at the time. But it was that was never an option for me, because what I wanted to find out was so important to me. And for me, the ending of the PhD was about the answers that it gave me and the ability to ask those questions. At the time, I didn't really care about having a PhD. I cared about being able to know how to answer the questions, which, as I said before, and then I realized it wasn't just about that. It was more, but it was incredibly useful.
Yes, and I think this sense of where your supervisors were coming from as well, in terms of this is common too. Like lots of people take interruptions, intermissions, whatever you call it. So to talk about that with your supervisor is not a terrible thing, and they won't think less of you. And what I think was really interesting, you said about not talking to your supervisor, because that happens a lot. People then just go, and as a supervisor, one of the most anxiety provoking things is the radio silence. So actually, when all of that stuff was going on, having that conversation is a really useful thing to do, and then you can make a plan to come back to it, can't you?
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things as well, which is, I think your background falls into this also. Like, I come from a background where my dad quit jobs when supervisors were bad. That's what happened. And so that's what I was quite used to, was that those are the decisions that you make. That's how you make decisions. So for me, you don't have those conversations. I wasn't kind of used to that. I had to build up and I had to learn that. And I think that's such an important thing, especially when we're talking about people from first-gen backgrounds like myself, is that understanding that quite often it's not like like some people are born with the skills, and people
Yeah.
don't always associate that as a skills base. It's just seen as what you do, but it is a skill set to recognize how and when to go for help. It is, there is experience in knowing that a system will support you. And for me, I wasn't used to those systems supporting me. I had a bit of a tough time. I left home at 16, and at university, I really struggled because I didn't get any funding whatsoever. I got given some bad advice. I was told that if I claimed any of the funding they offered, it would prejudice me from getting the full amount. So for the first, I know it wasn't great advice from the student union. So for my first year, 2 years of university, I had to just work full time. And so, and when I spoke to one of my lecturers about it, and explain, I left home, I'd been in a domestic violence situation, this other stuff had happened, I didn't have any support anywhere else, I was having to stay and work in the summers, blah, blah, blah. So trying to explain what was happening, the person that I'd said it to, the lecturer, just turned around and said, no, I think you've got boyfriend issues. And that kind of reduction of my situation to something they could understand. So I understand why it was done. But for me, it was just like, okay, I appreciate that my life is too difficult for people in this situation to understand. And okay, that's just something I learn and I move on from. And that is just something I learned and move on from. And it took me a lot of years to understand that actually this is why I talk very proudly about my experiences now. I don't know anyone's pity. I don't need it. I'm doing fine. Thank you very much. It's more, I really want to open up the door to, as I was saying to you before, understanding that when you come from a privileged background, talking about your background is welcomed, and it is something that provides you with even more success. When you come from backgrounds like mine, brilliant backgrounds like mine, when you talk about those backgrounds, people always think that you want sympathy or to be pitied, or they do pity you. When actually, sometimes we just need to say that this is just the road that I walk. And because of this road that I walked, it led to me making decisions that are very different to yours. I don't need your pity. I don't need your sympathy, and I don't need you to think that I do. But I do need you to understand that that is the experience that I have. And it's the minutiae of that detail that actually has the biggest impact. And so, all of the lovely EDI policies in the world don't really matter if your whole experience has been reduced down to a boy, which is, that disrupts everything. And so I think that there is something in that, if a system doesn't work for you or hasn't worked for you, you are less likely to use that system. And don't get me wrong, I didn't realize that was happening at the time. You just go where your brain tells you, don't you?
Yeah, no, and I think that's such an important point in terms of just acknowledging what internal voices might be going on at the time when you're really struggling with the things, especially if this is your thing, if this is where you fly. I am the academic, I am smart, this is what I do, and now I can't do it. And what's that mean for me? Who am I and what am I? So there's going to be all sorts of stuff going on. And exactly what you said about, and I can't really trust the system because I know that doesn't really work for me, or I don't really understand how it works. I don't know what's going on, which is exactly like we said before. It's like, that's why I want this podcast to happen, because I want you to have the stories and I want you to have the knowledge of how it works. And that's a whole nother podcast. But I think, thank you for opening that up for us, Chrissi, in terms of just reminding us that taking an interruption is not the end of the story. You can make this work for you. It can be a really positive decision for you to give you space and allow you to come back into the work, and to ask people to support you in that, and expect that support will be there for you.
But I think as well, it's really important to say that not everyone does get that support.
No.
I was very, very lucky, but I know many people that weren't. And I think that just does need to be acknowledged, because again, people can turn that on themselves. Was it the way I asked? Was it what I did? When actually, there's some brilliant supervisors out there, and there's some that perhaps need to develop some skill sets around inclusion.
Very diplomatically put. Let's come the revolution, we will have a different situation. Really, let's change academic culture. It really is. It's so important. I'm aware of time, and I'm aware that we might get caught up in revolutionary chat, which I love, but we need to draw this to a close. So I always ask people, and this feels even more reductive than it usually does, out of that great epic, when we've covered so much, is there a top tip or a thought for people to take away with them?
Just give yourself grace. Just understand that a PhD is about learning, and it is not about knowing everything. It's the opposite of that. And just think about what you want to achieve and whether this is taking you there, and how to get there. Because often we think success is running as fast as we can and doing as much as we can, when actually I think that's wrong. I think it's about understanding what you want to get out of something and how you're going to get there. And I think I've just worded that all terribly, so I'll try and think of something better.
No, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. In terms of, it's what I keep saying here, is that this is a self-development process, and it's all about you. It's all about you.
It's so much that, like, I honestly say this, my PhD had me give up drinking, and I cannot tell you what a seismic, I've been sober 6 years, which for me is important. Other people can drink happily, merrily. I can't do that. I binge. And my PhD got me to give up drinking. That's how much changed my brain. So a level of self-development. I'm a social scientist, so I'm not promising that from anything positivist or even for everyone, but epistemology, ontology changed the way my brain worked. So I would say, absolutely. Make sure that you're developing yourself as much as your research in this, because there's so much opportunity. That's my key thing. And I didn't even know it was. Yeah.
I love it. I love it, love it, love it. Oh, Chrissi, thank you so much. Thank you for really being so honest and sharing that story. And I know that's going to be of help to so many people. And I love your work. And I'm sure people want to find out more about you after this episode. But thank you so much.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time, and thank you for setting this podcast up there as well. I think it's just amazing what you're doing. So
bless you. It is totally my pleasure. And thank you all.